Hello, I'm James Fitzsimons, and welcome to the Career Scoop, a podcast all about career progression, advice, and experiences aimed at assisting those who are in career transition. Today, my guest is Director and Chief Operating Officer of Oneglobal Bermuda Broking Limited, Kilian Whelan. Kilian has been involved in insurance and alternative risk insurance markets for over 20 years all around the world. Kilian, you're very welcome to the Career Scoop.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on board. And just to jump in, you're in Bermuda at the moment, so you might just share with us a quick overview of your career to date, some of the highs and lows, what you've learned, and what are you most proud of?
Sure. Well, as James, you're aware, I'm originally from Dublin, born and bred, and moved out to Bermuda in 1996. But before that, it was my first job as a qualified accountant. Was with a small company in Dublin called International Risk Management, which was a part of relatively fledgling industry down on the docks at that point in the IFSC. At that point, I hedge fund management was the kind of sexy thing to get into back then, and I knew nothing about captive management, but I thought, well, you know what, I'll give it a try for 6 months and we'll see where that takes me. And so joined IRMG and did a couple of years with them, and their headquarters was here in Bermuda. And just one evening, we actually had our office in Leeson Street, kind of down towards the Stephen's Green end of it, and I was out with my sister and my brother-in-law one evening, and it was a lashing rain evening, and 2 a.m. we were looking for a taxi, and we couldn't coming out of the clubs there, and we couldn't get one, so went up to the office and to ring a taxi with my sister and brother-in-law Jim, and looked at the fax machine, and there was an offer for a job in Bermuda, looking for essentially the same sort of position that I was in Dublin. And I was kind of came at a point in my life, mid-20s, and I thought, well, you know what, could maybe think about doing that for a couple of years. So,
which club was it? Buck Whaley's or Legs or one of those? Or
I think it might have been Buck Whaley's.
Okay. Some of our listeners are too young to know what that is.
So, one thing led to another. So actually, the person who was running Bermuda office was the person who originally was running the Dublin office. So I knew him and he knew me, and he gave me my second opportunity. So I went out and checked out Bermuda for a couple of weeks, did a little bit of training with the person I was supposed to be taking over from, and came back to Dublin for about a month, and then moved back over in May of 1996. And that was kind of the start of life in Bermuda, which is coming up to just about my 25-year anniversary now next month. So turned 50 last month, and half of it will now have been spent in Bermuda. So stayed with International Risk Management 96 through 2000, and my role there was primarily as an account manager, producing financials and client management and so on. But there was an aspect of it that became internally focused, where I was given the role of financial controller. So I was doing the internal IRMG accounts, and that kind of for me was fairly critical in how my career developed over the next little while, because I wasn't just purely client focused. So I got involved in doing internal budgeting, management reporting, dealing with the senior management of the group, both in Bermuda, and the headquarters was at that point was in New Jersey, New York, White Plains, New York, and that gave me a broader view on the company and a broader view on my experience as well. Got involved in some internal audit projects, and just, as I say, widened my scope of experience from just being a narrow account manager, dealing with clients and putting out the monthly, quarterly accounts for the clients. And then in 2000, essentially a team of us, including the boss that had hired me a couple of times, we were approached by Jardine Lloyd Thompson, JLT. They wanted to get into the captive management business. There had been a few good deals done between our captive team and JLT. At that point, IRMG was 70% owned by Swiss Re, and 30% by the management. So JLT wanted in. Swiss Re, for some reason, didn't want to sell at that point. So JLT said, okay, well, we'll kind of go after the team. So there was teams from Bermuda, Cayman, Singapore, Guernsey, and then a couple of people in London came across to JLT, and we set up the greenfield site of JLT Captive Management in early 2000. So although JLT was a well-established company, our division had nothing. There was no revenue. There was no nothing. So I remember the first day in the office. We got this small office on Reed Street, and myself and my colleague, we went in the first day. We were in a kind of old boardroom. We had a computer and that was it. And we sat down and we were kind of like, okay, well, what do we do now? Because we didn't have any clients. We didn't have anything in front of us. So it kind of started from there. And in 2000, so my role at that point had kind of moved to being largely business development and client management. So, we had come across to grow a new business. So obviously we needed to service business as we got it, but the focus was grow the business. So then my day-to-day was going out prospecting, a little bit on the road, pipeline management, moving away a little bit from the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day account management, but still had my hand in that for quite some time. And then the business started to grow quite nicely. And then in 2006, we started to hit a bit of a bump in the road. And at that point, the person who was leading the Bermuda office left. And at that point, I was chosen to come in as president of the Bermuda office. So that was it was a high, but it was also a low, in that I was a 34, still relatively green, never managed an office before. And as I said, the business had been hitting a kind of a bumpy part for about 12 months coming up to that change. So we had started to lose some people. The business in Bermuda was changing its focus. It wasn't just pure captive management. The sidecar ILS type thing was beginning to take off. So there was competition coming from other sectors. So that's when I made my first real management role, or when I was promoted to my first real management role, and did that really from 2006, and the role expanded over the next 10 years from not being just Bermuda, but in 2010, I was made CEO of the Captive Management Group, which brought in the other islands. And then in kind of 2011, 2012, went out on the road to see if we could build other platforms. So I led basically a project to establish ourselves in the US, which we did in 4 different domiciles. We set up an operation in Barbados, while at the same time trying to grow the existing operations in Bermuda, Guernsey, Singapore, and so on. So that was challenging. A lot of balls in the air to try and manage. And my role really was from oversight of everything from business development to dealing with HQ, reporting into them, driving the business development process, trying to win clients when you get the clients, trying to bed them down, keep them happy, keep employees happy, recruiting our teams, a number of redesign of how we operated internally in terms of our team structure and so on. So as you can imagine, pretty much anything that happened kind of at one point came through my desk. And then, so that brings us to kind of like 2015, and it was another sort of difficult time, I would say, which really it was led by changes in reporting lines from myself into London, where I was having difficulties to try and achieve what I wanted to achieve. And I felt that the progress we'd made in growing over the last, from 2006, and particularly the last 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, that I was seeing there's going to be a distinct slowdown and a hesitancy to be as entrepreneurial as we previously have been. So that at that point, I was like, okay, probably time for me to just step back and reset. So I left JLT at that point, and kind of just took some time out. And then after that, in actually late 2015, I was only a few months, I guess, left JLT. I started to assist on a pro bono basis for America's Cup with the America's Cup Bermuda side of the operations, who were responsible for creating the infrastructure. And I met with the CEO and the chairman. And at that point, they were a very thin team. And I was still on my gardening period from JLT, which was for a year. And I said, well, I'd be delighted to come in and help. So they brought me in as essentially as an advisor at that point, given it was pro bono, it wasn't an official role. But effectively, I come in as right-hand man to the CEO, and sat on a lot of the committees, helped drive a lot of the committees for America's Cup. And then later in the year, as my guardian period was coming to a close, sat down with the CEO, and we agreed that I was enjoying it. He was grateful for what I was able to give to it, and we agreed that I would come on in an official capacity as the chief operating officer. So came on early 2016. That was the change of my official role, and was with them through to the end of the Cup. The Cup ended in June 2016, a little bit too quickly for my liking. Unfortunately, the Americans didn't quite put up the fight everybody was expecting, and the Kiwis ran away with it.
You might just share, just for some people who may not be knowledgeable around what the America's Cup is, and just like, this is not just a couple of boats going around Bermuda. There's like this huge amount of investment in teams and worldwide viewpoints that people are looking eyeballs on you. Yeah,
so the America's Cup goes back hundreds of years. The old mug, as they call it, and it's a sport that, by its nature, there's a lot of wealthy people behind it. There's an awful lot of prestige to it. And in 2015, the Americans held the America's Cup. The last staging had been in San Francisco. It is a big event. It is only held, it's not rigidly held like the Olympics every 4 years. The holder of the cup gets to dictate really how the next competition is going to happen. They will decide what design of boats people need to use. They'll decide the venue and the rules and so on. But when the cup here was the second cup where they were using what they call foiling catamarans. These were 50-foot yachts that, if you've ever seen foiling, they literally just come out of the water and they're sailing on two very thin foils that come down into the ocean. So they can sail on a 10-knot wind and get up to close to 50 mile an hour it's incredible, the technology behind it. To stage it in Bermuda, a bit like the Olympics and World Cups, when they're looking to choose on a venue, they go out to cities and cities bid. So there were, I think, initially 12 cities, venues bid to host the 2017 America's Cup. Bermuda were invited by Sir Russell Coutts, who was the CEO behind America's Cup at that point in time, to throw their name into the hat. And there was a lot of skepticism at that point in Bermuda about being able to hold such a major event. But proposal was done. KPMG were engaged as advisors, so that they helped provide a lot of the professional consultancy advice needed at that point in time to the Bermuda government to put together a professional and comprehensive application. And they went through the rounds, and Bermuda went from one of 12 to one of 8 to one of 4 to one of 2, and got the win in, I think it was December 2014, or November 2014. They got the win, which nobody was more surprised than Bermuda. And then they had to very quickly try and pull people together. So they established America's Cup Bermuda. There was two entities: America's Cup, which is the Russell Coutts, which is this is the boat side of things. This is the teams. So they came down and rented offices, and they scaled up very quickly with professionals who have been in the business doing event management throughout all their career. And no more than the insurance industry, the sports industry and the event management industry is also a very small industry, and people know each other. So when you're looking for a media person, you don't have to dig too far into your Rolodex when you're in. If I'm looking for an actuary or a lawyer, I know who to call. So America's Cup were able to staff up pretty quickly. And then the Bermuda government decided they were going to set up a separate entity called America's Cup Bermuda, which is a limited liability company. It was separate from the government. Clearly, it had a board appointed to it, which was made up of professionals and entrepreneurs within the Bermuda industry. It wasn't made up of politicians. The CEO of America's Cup Bermuda did report to the Minister for Economic Development, so that clearly there was a tie-in. But the idea was the ACBDA, as we called it, would be the conduit to link up public and private sector Bermuda entities to work together, and also as a liaison for the Russell Coutts America's Cup operations, that he could get the service that he needs from a dedicated entity such as ACBDA, rather than them trying to go out to individual government departments and so on. So, and it worked pretty well. But the biggest challenge that we had to start off with was that we had to reclaim 10 acres of land, which was going to be the staging area, the village for America's Cup, which was done down at Dockyard. And that was, as that project was just beginning to come together, the very initial stages is when I joined, and it was a very interesting time. There was a lot of, there was a lot of sensitivities in the procurement process and which contracts were going to where and to whom and so on. So that was something that I got involved with fairly quickly. I was the only accountant, finance person, so being able to bring my experience of financial processes to bear were called on pretty quickly. So we ended up, we built, I think it was just shy of 10 acres, and it was a combination of bringing in large ships with granite from Canada came in and dumped them into dockyard. And at that point, there was also one of the cruise liners here wanted to dredge part of the North Shore because sand and silt was building up, and a massive project, as you can imagine. And we managed to negotiate that they could do the dredging, but we would take the dredge. Because they had to put it somewhere. So we managed to get a lot of free fill for that deal, which was quite good.
So when you got that fax after being in Buckwhaleys all those years ago, you couldn't imagine you were going to be dealing in dredge to fill in a landfill to in effect to have the America's Cup on it.
No, and as the planning started to move ahead, and you're dealing with, from the side that we were on, you're dealing with the security issues. You're dealing with trying to set up transportation plans. You're dealing with the procurement process for vendors. So we weren't 100% responsible for that, because that's more marketing. That was more on the America's Cup side of things. But the things that you ended up having to deal with, and you had to consider from a security perspective, terrorist attacks. What's the possibility of somebody coming in on a ship and there's a bomb on the ship, and how do you alleviate that sort of threat? Every day you went in, there was something different. Which, having spent 20 years in insurance, it was quite refreshing. And you're dealing with the professionals at the top of their game in a professional elite field. And these boats are essentially Formula One cars on water, and they're immense to see, or were immense to see in Bermuda over the 2 years that they were here. So. And then the event itself, when it came about, my role sort of had changed from the planning to the implementation, and then to the running. So my main role during the event itself was being a part of the control center, where we had CCTV cameras all over the place, television screens all over the place. So you're watching from the security aspect to health and safety in the village, to criminal activity in the village, making sure that there's orderly transition in and out of the village, management of the lift in and out, which was primarily through ferries. Just by nature of the way Bermuda is built, it's much quicker to get in and out on a ferry than it is on a bus. So that the ferries operated in a manner that they'd never done before. And there was a big concern because politically, the America's Cup was seen as the party of the right in Bermuda, and the party of the left and the workers' unions and so on. Let's just say it took a while for them to get on board. And, the amount of times there were strikes that were threatened to be pulled at the last minute at the most inappropriate time, I can count on way more than two hands. So you're trying to plan for that, try to mitigate against that, trying to negotiate that event doesn't happen. But when it all came together, actually the ferry drivers and the bus drivers and the Bermuda Regiment and the police, they were the ones that helped make it a success, because they saw the value of it to Bermuda. It was just an incredible event, and they bought into it. And once they bought into it, everybody was in it together, and it did become a tremendous success.
That's fabulous. What you learned from that, there's a sense of like stuff happens every day that you can plan in such a tight. You've been used to having plans where you could actually, the 2 to 3 to 5 year plan. This was all a plan every week or a plan every day that kind of would evolve. And,
yeah.
How did you change? How did you change? How did you take that experience to your next experiences? What did you learn from it? What were the kind of couple of things for you that changed you?
I think I learned the importance of people management, the importance of not getting people to do what they don't want to do, but trying to reason that people will eventually come around, and whatever you're asking them to do is actually for their benefit, but sometimes it takes a while for that message to get through. Crisis management is when things start to go wrong, to analyze what's really important. So, like triage in a hospital. We had some incidences during the event. We had a super yacht that basically beached itself on a rock right in front of the race course, right in front of our control room at the start of racing for a day. It's like, well, how do we manage that? And that had to be made sure it was safe, and we need to put it in a safe zone around it. But ultimately, it was like, okay, sorry, you're stuck on a rock, but you're going to have to stay there, and we're going to continue on with this racing. And then in the evening, when the tide came back in, we'll sort you out then.
Who gave the message that?
And then there was, unfortunately, there was a death of a tourist one evening on the water, away from the event village, but it was all part of the event, and managing the communications with regard to that. We had planned for what do you do when something goes wrong. And so you had the media, I won't use the word playbook, but that's essentially what it is. If X, Y happens, here's what we need to do. So yeah, I think I learned how to step back and assess a situation more clearly. I think it comes to some of your other potential discussion topics here is looking at a stressful situation and figuring out, well, first, is it a stressful situation? Am I making it a stressful situation? And how best to manage that. So that was definitely something that I learned, and that you need to keep driving people. People are quite happy to be led, but you can't, particularly when we were dealing with the public sector. If you set out a plan for people and you kind of shepherd along, then it will happen. But if you assume, for instance, coming from the private sector, coming from financial sector, international business sector, where you're dealing with professionals who have gone to college, who have gotten qualifications, who have a self-drive themselves. So you sort of expect people, you say, can you do X, Y, and Z? And they will go and do X, Y, and Z. That's not the case when you're dealing with the public sector. And that's not just Bermuda, I would imagine. That's public sector the world over. So it was trying to come up with a plan that we said to people, we're going to do this, and here's what the plan is. But to actually make them get from, we have a plan, to then, okay, go and do it, was incredibly difficult. And to try and implement a strategy which was essentially going top down, because in public sector, people listen to the people at the top, be it the permanent secretary or the minister or whoever it is, and that message has to feed down. So we had to undertake a communications campaign across all the various departments that we were dealing with, be it works in engineering, again, security, transport, public Department of Communications, that we have all these plans, but now you have to implement them. And how are you going to do that? And then it was nearly like a plan to get the plan done.
But you then had to learn about this yourself, because the audience, like anything, who's your audience appropriately? Because like obviously within the civil service, nothing happens in any country. But then again, people are used to a certain way of working, and you have to get them to support you. You got to figure out how you get the messaging across and get them to hear it. And
that's what we had to do. And that urgency started to come into focus in late 2016. So the event was on in June 2017. We've got the plans, and we've gotten to essentially Christmas time 2016. And I said to the CEO, we have these lovely plans, but I'm not seeing who's going to do anything with them. And so over Christmas week, when everybody was quiet, we went around the heads of each of the departments and we sat down with them and we said, this is yours. How are you going to get this done? We'll help in as much as we can, but you have to make this happen. And that's it. It was by making them realize they had responsibility, and if they didn't carry out the responsibility, the effects of their not completing their plan will have disastrous effects on the success of the America's Cup and will reflect on them. So that's really how you motivate people, that this is your responsibility and you are going to have to be answerable if you don't implement this. So how are you going to do it? We can go and get you staff, everybody. The word or the argument back was always, we don't have the people. We don't have the people. We said, we know you don't have the people, but we can assist. You're also going to have to create resources somehow in your department, and ideally a dedicated support, because part-time responsibility wouldn't have worked. So we ended up in pretty much most departments, there was one person for that next 6 months was dedicated to the implementation of that plan. And then we could, at ACBDA, be it through committee members or you had to pay for additional resources, they could give help to that allocated person. So it was tagged on, and not necessarily all the resources were dragged out of each individual public department.
Fascinating. And now, moving on from that, you're now involved in your third or fourth startup, if I can use it, and then bringing all this experience. Do you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah. So I think you discuss about networking, and over the years of 25 years in Bermuda, you build up a network of people that you know. So I was asked to assist in setting up this current venture, which is largely backed and run by a lot of my ex-colleagues from JLT. So, to have received the call, can you assist us set up this new operation, wasn't a huge surprise in that, I had those connections, had that network. And so we started that in September of last year. And we got licensed in just before Christmas. But again, we're a small operation at the moment. We're still very small. We're looking to expand. But again, in this environment, it's difficult to grow, particularly when you're trying to get people from overseas. But I knew the people that I needed to come in quickly to help us get set up. And thankfully, I have that network of people, because it's difficult if you're trying to do something and opening the yellow pages and just running your finger down. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And it's called Oneglobal Bermuda Broking Limited.
Oneglobal Bermuda Broking Limited, yes. So the essence of Oneglobal is they are originally a Lloyd's historically a Lloyd's Marine broking house. but with the opportunity in the market that's seen now, some hedge fund money behind Oneglobal Broking, and they've drafted in, as I say, some senior people from JLT and some senior people from other entities as well to make it a global specialist broking house. So we've opened our doors here in Bermuda. We've opened in Greece. We've opened in the US. We're in the process of opening in Latin America, Singapore, Hong Kong, and I think potentially Australia. So that, you know, the footprint is going out. It is exciting. It's building from scratch. The way IT has gone, particularly in the last 12 months with COVID, in terms of having Zoom meetings like this, everything being in the cloud, it's much easier to set up a business than it was 5 years ago. From a technical perspective, in terms of just getting computers on desks that are linked to systems that can work. So currently we're leveraging all the systems that London have, and you know, we're doing that through the cloud. So we don't have to create a standalone big server room here in Bermuda, which was the old way you would do things. Yeah, each island would have had its own computer infrastructure, and the difficulties that go with that, and the cost that goes with that. You don't have that, so it is much more efficient to try and get up through the starting gate now than it would have been 5 years ago.
That's progress in the sense of where IT enables in a huge way, and more efficient and less time traveling and all these kind of areas.
Yeah, I have to say, I haven't been on a plane, obviously, to go and meet any of my colleagues, but with the Zoom calls, you still get to see them. You still get to be able to build a relationship with them, which is different than when you used to just call them over the phone. Yeah. So I know a lot of people struggle with the video conferencing. I'm very comfortable with it now, and I actually do prefer it rather than the old style picking the phone up.
Yeah, it's funny. It's probably muscle memory and how people are able to change or evolve. You mentioned you're obviously going to recruit or people for the organization. Back over your career, what do you look in the people that you hire? Okay, I take it that they have the ability to do the job. I'm talking about the human. So
that's obviously the first one, that they've got the qualifications. Yeah. Obviously the experience, if you can get it. I think probably it's possibly a little bit different in Bermuda, particularly if you are hiring from overseas, which a lot of the hiring that we did for financial accountants and insurance people was, rather than if you're hiring somebody who lives in Dublin and you're hiring them in Dublin. It's a much bigger decision for somebody to take a job here than it is just go down the street and take another job in Dublin. You're asking somebody to uplift themselves from their home country, from their family, or potentially they're bringing their family with them, potentially with kids as well. So I think a cultural fit to not just the company, but also to the Bermuda lifestyle and the economics of it for a particular individual. That do you feel in 3 years' time or 2 years' time that they're going to be happy they made that decision and have been able to fit into Bermuda? Because it's not for everybody. But you invest so much time and so much money bringing somebody out, you have to get it right. Like I say, it's different if you're in Dublin, you hire somebody 3 weeks into it, it's not really working out. You can kind of say they're on a probation, right? Sorry, it's not working out, and we go and we look for somebody else. And you've lost the time, obviously, but you haven't necessarily lost a massive amount of expense. So cultural fit is definitely one that I would put a lot of importance on, and that they understand what they're coming out to. If they're coming out with a family, and the partner, the husband, the wife, if they're not going to be working in Bermuda, they understand what that means. That Bermuda is only a small place, so it might be fine for the first 3 or 6 months, but after a while, when you're not working in Bermuda and given the immigration rules here, you can't just do something else. They need to understand that, getting the kids into school and so on, so that they realize the challenge that they're taking on for themselves. And then from a personality, I'm looking for somebody. I like people who talk straight. I like people. I want to ask people what their vision for themselves is, and that obviously changes depending on what stage in the career of the particular person you're interviewing.
Okay, that's very simple. And you're happy if someone says, "Well, I don't know, but I'll find out." In that sense, that ability.
Yes, and that was one of the phrases that I learned in America's Cup. The CEO, he always said this. He said, "We know what we know, but we need to make sure that we know what we don't know, because there's a lot of things we were doing. We didn't know what the answer was, but we knew we didn't, and we knew we had to go and find that answer. It's fine not to know something, but it's important to realize that." So some people can come into a job, if you're interviewing them and there's 5 criteria, they might say, "Yeah, I'm great at this, 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 and this." They know themselves are not great at this, but they'll kind of just try and blag their way through it. But you should say straight up, "I might need a bit of help with this bit," in which case, fine, we can get that for you. We can get you the training. But if you come in and you've blagged your way saying that I'm A star at all 5, then it's difficult for you to backtrack. And when you get your feet on the ground, to say, "Actually, I need a bit of help on this one."
And then your credibility and people that, what else have they maybe over blagged in a sense.
Yeah. So again, America's Cup, I don't know how many times I said it. I said, "I don't know the first thing about sailing." Which when you're in America's Cup, people kind of go, "What?" I said, "But I have years of financial and management experience, which is why I'm here. I don't need another sailor."
Yeah, that's really, really simple. And just moving on to another question. So say to that 22-year-old, are you 25, 27, 30 years ago, 28 years ago, my maths. What would you say to somebody coming out of that might be coming out of college, or they might be coming out of a job, just how they might look at the world and how they might kind of, what advice would you give them?
I think having an open mind, with my own experience of leaving the family, my entire family, and coming to a small island in the middle of the ocean. The only thing I knew was I knew one person who had given me the job here, and I didn't know anybody else. But I have an open mind that I was going to give it a try. And I think you have to realize that you have to make things happen. It isn't just going to fall into your hands. You have to get up there and drive yourself. You have to think ahead, plan ahead. Now, whatever you plan, it'll never work out exactly the way you plan, but at least you have been looking forward, as opposed to maybe just drifting along or waiting for somebody to be the one to say to you, "Okay, well, I'm going to give you this job." You have to go out and you have to fight for it and you have to get it. I think also, and this comes with age, I guess, don't sweat the small stuff. And it takes a little bit of experience, I think, to figure out what exactly is small stuff and what is really important. And don't be afraid to, comes back to what we just talked about, don't be afraid to ask a question, even if you think it's a stupid question. that the chances are, if you don't know it, there's plenty of it. If you're in a conference room and there's 20 people there, and the person is lecturing about something and says something and you don't understand it, I can guarantee you there are other people in that room don't understand it as well. Yeah. But who's the one that has the courage to put their hand up and say, actually, can you go back and explain that for me, please? And there's things early in my career in insurance that I didn't necessarily understand, and I should have asked a simple question: can you just explain what this is and how that works? But I remember back then thinking, well, surely they'd expect me to know that, so you kind of just muddle on.
I have a great friend, a guy called David Mulville, who's been on in one of the early series of the Career Scoop. But he's a business in Beirut now, but he was company secretary of Riverdeep back in the day. And he tells a story of he's a brilliant man, brilliant person. And he's been in New York up 8 floors with IBM. And we're trying to sell them something. And there was 7 IBM people there, and was David. And so they were throwing presentations at him, and they were using acronyms. And he says, well, I don't know what that is. So he put his hand up after the second presentation. Can you tell me what that BAC is? And he said he never saw 7 lads, and they were all men, looking down at their shoes. Nobody could tell him. So he said at that stage the penny dropped. Don't be afraid to ask, and just like you've shared there. That's great. How about just a couple of more questions, Kilian? Mentors for you, or were you aware of the concept of mentors when you arrived on Ireland, or have you've probably been a mentor, been a senior C-suite in companies? What's your thoughts around that for a younger person on the way up?
So I don't think so. I've mentioned my boss gave me the first opportunity, hired me in Dublin and then back in Bermuda, and he kind of led the team to set up JLT. I think he was probably a mentor to me, but we didn't. There was certainly nothing official in that I am your mentor. I am going to sit down and give you the guidance to get through life. But what he did was, he recognized capabilities in me and gave me opportunities, which then I either asked for them, or he said, "Are you interested in it?" And I then went and grabbed it. And I think without what the opportunities he gave me and the guidance, and when I mean guidance in terms of teaching me about my role as we went through it, again, this is just how it happened, as opposed to it was this is planned, you're my mentor. So yes, I think I did have a mentor in him. And I've tried to do the same to people that have either reported to me directly or indirectly if they've needed some advice. And I would say particularly in the last number of years when I left, or when I went back to JLT, and there was the buyout by Marsh of JLT, where a lot of people had to consider what their future was, what's the right decision in a very quickly changing environment. So I spent pretty much a year trying to guide. I won't say mentor, because again, I don't think I was officially a mentor to anybody, but I spent a lot of time trying to guide people to try and work through what the right answer for them was. And for some, it would be to stay. For some, it would be to go. For some, it would be give it a shot and see what happens for 3 to 6 months. That was if I'm honest, that was a very tough period. There was a lot of stress. People leaving every day of the week, and how do you deal with that, and the effect of communication to the clients. So yes, that was a stressful time, but I learned a lot from it as well in how to deal with those situations. You try to be as objective as you can, and very often you have to give advice that is good for the person, but it's not necessarily good for what you're trying to achieve. So over the years, and in America's Cup, there was a couple of the employees in the small team there that helped along in how they managed their position, how they were able to grow in their position, and then back to before that, when you have people who report to you, the main goal is to help them get their job done, but also help them develop themselves.
Interesting. You mentioned stress there within the kind of that little job you did between the America's Cup and your new job now. Stress. How you like you're at top of organizations, a lot of moving parts, a lot of travel. How do you process stress yourself? And it's good and bad stress. I understand that. I'm just curious. Have you any thoughts that you'd like to share that work for you, or maybe don't work for you, or?
When it starts to get very stressful, I've literally just left the building and gone for a walk, just to try and clear the air and try and get away from the noise of what's going on. And as I've said about not sweating the small stuff, is trying to figure out and is the stress that's been created actually proper stress, or is it being manufactured? There's a lot of personalities that can create a stress that is just not necessary. Certain personalities will create a stress like that, and I will certainly try and stop that as quickly as I can, because stress it's infectious, and certainly if it's in a public environment, in an open floor, you need to try and shut that down. So I'll try and bring somebody into a room and try and say, okay, let's just talk through this. What are the concerns? And try and calm them down. But yeah, it's just trying to keep in the moment, trying to see what the bigger picture is, what's the goal, and what is truly going on here. What do we truly need to do to get through this situation?
Interesting. Final question. 5 words to describe your career to date.
Challenging and at times hard. Most definitely. It was competitive. And I would say it was more competitive on not so much on the internal side, where you're trying to win a position over somebody else, but in the business development of growing a business and going out and competing with our competitors to land that client. And that was a large part of what I had to do for 15 odd years. I enjoyed it at times when you won. But then there was the ones that you lost, and who was it that said you learn more from your losses than your wins? So it was definitely a competitive career. International. So I'm very grateful that I've had a career that has opened my eyes to the world, both in terms of where I've been able to physically travel, but also in who I've been able to interact with from every continent on the planet. I'm being lucky to visit a lot of those as well, which I feel if I hadn't taken that step to come to Bermuda for the couple of years in 1996, my life wouldn't have turned out anywhere like it is. I wouldn't have seen anywhere the number of places on the planet that I have done. So definitely international. It's been fun. I've worked with a lot of fun people, and I like working with fun people. And then the last one might sound a bit odd, but just personal growth. I think having gone through my career and everything that I've done, the variety of it, the way it has developed over the 25 years, I'm definitely different as a person, and I feel I've grown as a person, and I'm very thankful for the opportunities that I've had to have had those experiences, and hopefully learn from most of them, if not all of them.
Kilian, listen, that was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think there's lots more stories that maybe would come up after, maybe with a glass of wine, the America's Cup and other areas. But I think for anyone listening in, will certainly get a sense of go for it, bet on yourself, and don't be afraid to say I don't know, but I can learn.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for listening to the Career Scoop, brought to you by Elevate Career Advice and Elevate Executive Selection, Dublin and Bermuda. I'm James Fitzsimons, and I hope you have enjoyed listening. Hope you tune in next week for more episodes. Bye.